the next session, I have the pleasure of catching up with James Mann. For some people may know, James may know. James is the owner of Donovan's Dairy in South Australia, which is near Mount Gambier, which is one of the nation's leading dairy businesses. James has been involved in the Australian dairy industry for over 25 years, with experience in dairy farming, agriculture more broadly across different regions of Australia as well as New Zealand and the UK. Donovan's Dairy supplies over 20 million litres and per annum and currently milks around 2,000 cows. James has been chair of Dairy South Australia from 2002 to 2015 and has been involved in a number of other dairy leadership roles. He's now also a director of Dairy Australia since 2015 and is currently the chair of Dairy Australia. So James and I have known each other for a little while, crossed over and had the odd conversation about herd improvement. So this is one that we're going to have it in front of quite a larger crowd than what we normally do, and there perhaps won't even be a glass of red to confirm the discussion. Yeah. And we'll socially distance up here as well. That's good. So welcome to the stage, James.
Thank you, Graeme. Nice to be here.
So, as in the introduction, you've talked, you're now over in Mount milking a couple of thousand cows, but that's not where it all started. I remember visiting a property up at Numurkah there. Could you just give everybody a little bit of an insight of how that commencement?
Yeah. So I was fortunate to be born into a really strong farming family out of the UK, and my father and mother bought a place in Western Queensland. Out at St George, which is about 4 hours, 600 k's west of Brisbane, in the late 70s, and I was with a very strong farming family of 13. I've got 16 cousins, 13 are still farming, so pretty interested in what Mum and Dad were doing, and ended up coming out here in Year 12, or the equivalent of Year 12. And ended up at Marcus Oldham for an interview, got into Marcus Oldham at Geelong, and decided I wanted to do my tertiary education in Australia. So that sort of did that, ended up doing some work experience for Brian Flanagan at Catamatite, who you'd probably remember, Graeme, who was instrumental in that Lyle, Queer and what was the other bull, the 3 bulls that came in? Anyway, he was in that syndicate, so that sort of got me into dairying, and he was a really good guy to work for. Kept going, had a few visa problems, small bit of deportation a couple of times, and then ended up buying a place with my family from the UK backing me at Nirringalingaluk, and started milking in 1989. About the same time as Jerry started New Genes, I think. And we started off with like 100 cows and 120 cows, which had been herd retested and recorded back to 1959 from the same owner, so there'd be 30 years of breeding we grabbed hold of. And I suppose got excited by yourself and ABS at the time and Les Sandals, and I think there'll be a few others we've missed, and thought that we need to crank these cows up, and really got into the feeding of them. Went from 600,000 litres to 3.6 million in the 8 or 9 years we were there, and then saw the opportunity and moved on again.
So when I think you said you milked 360 to 400 cows at peak at Numurkah, what were the things that helped that decision-making process there? You said ran into a guy called Jared Daniels at the time, and what services or what are the things that were important in to make those decisions as you invested in the herd and in the property?
I think I always wanted to grow feed, so like you're a farmer really, so you buy the dirt, you put whatever crop you want to put in, it rains or it doesn't rain, or you irrigate it, and then you've got to work out how you convert that into cash. And for us that's milk and cattle. So that was obviously a driver a profit driver, was to grow lots of feed and lots of high quality feed. And we would, like quality of feed is king. So you just used to come back and, as I say, you'd listen to you guys and you'd been to the States and you just go, wow, these guys have got, 10,000 litres or whatever it was, 20,000 pounds at the time. We've got to move in that direction, and that's what we chose to do. So production really was all about jamming food into cows and getting heaps of production. And Jerry was there, and we'd use the freeze branding and all the herd recording stuff all the way through. I always sort of valued that base of genetics that we were able to buy with the farm. That we definitely got an above average herd. I don't know how much above average, but it was certainly well above average herd, and we wanted to keep building on it.
So 30 years of herd recording and AI and Murdochs.
Yeah.
So there's probably a couple of people in the room might even remember the family. So comfortable life, 360 cows, 3-point-something million litres, 2,000 cows, and a distance to Mount Gambier. How did that translate? How did you, the reason to make that move, and then what were the implications moving from when you knew what cow 365 was to I haven't got a clue who 2020 is?
Yeah. The reason for the move was we were just 30 or just under 30, I can't quite remember, and we'd grown the Numurkah farm from 6 times or thereabouts, and we're thinking, where's the next challenge? And we would have been pretty comfortable to buy the neighbours, except they were uncomfortable to sell. So that's like, well, we're sort of, Robin's a Kiwi, she had no emotional attachment, I had no emotional attachment really. It's like we were sort of gypsies, and pretty happy to say, well, if you don't want to, if we can't buy you, well, you better buy us. Which it didn't really happen that way, but somebody else bought us. And we always looked around to where we were going to go. We had a good look at sort of probably Finley and through there. Probably always thought that water would be a driver of the ability to grow feed, and the less linked you were to regulated water, the better you were. So underground water was probably was an attraction. And at that time, the Mount was in SA, it still is. And 2 cents a litre extra for being that side of the border. That was also an attraction. So that's where we decided to go. We had some partners which we got on pretty well with, and started to work out how that all worked. And first year we bought it on March the 4th. We'd put pivots up, put a dairy up, and we milked cows on June the 6th. So a fair bit of action in that time, bit of planning required. It was good fun.
So it was a greenfield site?
100% greenfield site, yeah. No power, no houses, no dairy, not many fences, plenty of rocks, fair bit of cape weed. That's about it.
How'd you accumulate the cows? Like you didn't breathe,
I didn't suddenly get, there was no sex semen, and even that couldn't get 360 into 1500 real quick. So, we spent a lot of time with Lee Hamilton and did a lot of miles or Ks, and we bought cattle from probably Wagga down through Gippsland, through the Western District, through the north, into the Adelaide Hills. I think we did 100,000 Ks in 9 months. So between farms and we had a little boy at the time, so he got pretty good at travelling. And you'd just load up on a Monday morning, or you'd work 3 days at home. We had pretty nice people working for us. Work 3 days at home and then 4 days on the road. It was exciting to do it though.
Yeah. And you continued herd recording all the practices that you had at the previous farm while you're going through that expansion process?
Yeah, we've herd recorded every year since we've been there. I think we just need that basis of data to make good decisions, and continue to do so today. Like I don't know, even in tough years, that's not one of the things that's on the budget cut. Probably not monthly. We're 6 times a year, and that's probably enough for what we need it for. But yeah, it's still an important data point that we need.
And you also became quite an early adopter of genomics. How did you see that fitting into your business plan or what you're aiming to do?
So genomics is, we'd got to a space where we were probably past really fast growth. So every female, we still kept every female, but we weren't going to need every female. And the generation turn and the better selection for bulls, I just kept thinking that we had this opportunity to actually suddenly have really high reliabilities relative to what we'd had before in the female side of the operation. And if we were going to start knocking out, and then it was probably not much more than 10% of our replacements, but if they were going to be surplus, then the better we could select them, then the quicker the rate of genetic gain and whatever we were selecting for would happen. So it was like, well, we need to do this properly. And I think you were at Holstein at the time, and we did have probably 12 months with Matt and a few others and Daniel to try and work out how you suddenly put 400 heifers through as a cohort instead of just odds and sods. And yeah, it was challenging, but it was good.
So which is interesting, just a little bit of background. I think at one stage there might have been as many gold bullion sitting in your end of the world that there was any other place in Australia. So, and then to go from a high reliability daughter proven to genomics is quite a step. Fertility was one of the things that in a large herd environment and a relatively high production environment, what's your fertility journey been over the last number of years?
Yeah, so I guess Numurkah was just brewed for production and culled for overproduction, and fertility just happened. We were still a seasonal herd. And induction was fine, never really thought about it, just did it. So tight calving, bang, away you go. And when we got to the mount, I'm probably never totally comfortable with induction, but it was okay if it was a profit driver, but ethically, I was also, I prefer not to. So when we got to the mount, and I don't know if I can't remember if we were trying to be seasonal or not, but suddenly when you're milking the first year 12 or 13 or 1400 cows and you've got a 20% empty rate, it's like, we've got 250 cows here, I'm just not that comfortable loading all them up to get them killed. So start getting a bit more focused on what we're doing, and you've got your nutritionist in one ear saying, well, it's your transition, and your vet in another ear saying it's something else, and anyway, it still ends up being a problem. So it's a multi-pronged approach. It's like, yes, okay, we do need to sort our nutrition out. Yes, we do need to get transition back better. Yes, we do need to make sure we've got our vaccines up and whatever veterinary advice is chucked in there as well. But equally in the background, if you start breeding for something, and I think you'll tell me I'm right or wrong, but 04, 05 DPR came out in the States. So we've got this tool that we haven't had before. We need to start thinking about it, and roughly at the same time, productive life or longevity came out as well. And it's like, okay, so these are some management tools we're keenly interested in. That's we've probably got enough production. If we're really honest, we were doing, I don't know what we were doing then, 9.5 or 10,000 litres, and the next bit was how well we could feed them, not necessarily how well we could breed them for production. So let's start selecting these secondary traits, and they were the first two we grabbed hold of, along with perhaps mastitis, but that's probably a secondary one.
So what did you see in say your heifer groups, for instance, in terms of in-calf rates, as you got a couple of generations into?
So I think for a start, nothing. You think, oh, well, I'm doing it, and we did mess about. Oh, that's probably not quite the right word, but we did experiment perhaps with the three-way crosses to sort of put that fertility for health on turbocharge, and certainly for that trait, it was no problem, it worked. But there were some other bits and pieces that we weren't very happy with, so we did that for about 5 years probably, and then said, no, this is not the route we want to go down. It's not delivering cattle that we want in our system. And at the end of that 5 years, though, if you were turning over then probably 30% of your herd a year, you've sort of nearly done two lots. At the end of that 5 years, we were starting to get some benefits in fertility. So everybody measures fertility different, and I probably should use the industry one, but I don't. So we were every time we were going to a cow then, we were about 38% chance of getting a calf on the ground. And it sort of stayed between 38 and 40 for 8 or 9 years. And in the last 5, it's gone from 41 or something to probably 45. So if we join the other one we use, if we join 1,000 cows, how many we're going to calve next year, next calving? And it got down to 65 and it now sits at about 75.
So you just finished a calving period. How many cows did you get through in 3 weeks?
Well, Jo, my number one herd manager lady, is here, so she'd probably give the exact answer, but I think we're aiming to calve 910 or something, and we calve 600 in 3 weeks. And that's pretty normal. Like springtime, we'll calve 900 out of 1,400 in 6 weeks. In 3 weeks, sorry.
So are there any other focus you move through? Is there anything else that now is you've worked your way to a certain extent, they never go away, you still have to, any other traits that have become through, say, genomics or other areas that you started to add focus to?
I think all the health traits, for me, when I think back to, even back perhaps as far as Laurie Wells, he described the cow and the way he used to describe it was fantastic. But he was always saying that you need to breed this way to make sure why are we doing that? Because you want cows that give heaps of milk, give little trouble, getting calf every year. And type was the way to get there, and that was fantastic. Now you've got the direct measurements. So measure the direct measurements, the reliability's gone up. So whatever they are, so look, the health traits and, immunity plus for us is the pathway we've chosen, but equally the other, there's transition right and some health dollars. Different people have got different measurements, but they're still measuring health. So we want, what do we want as dairy farmers? We want lots of production for not a lot of hassle. So anything that can do that, we're keen on.
So the other part then, you mentioned a bit about feeding. Is there, any other innovations, say, from a overall farm aspect that you've looked at? We've talked mostly about breeding, but you've got to feed 2,000 cows and all the followers. So is there anything more recently happening in that space?
No, I think that's a continuing journey, Graeme, for definite. So, there's on farm, there's always a focus on growing all our own forage nowadays and not using much adjustment. At the moment, we're in the middle of putting a solar stroke battery stroke generator stroke very smart computer program up that if it works as expected will probably drop 30 to 40% off our power bill, which is $0.01 a litre. We're looking at, we've got a lot of big data coming at us. I think probably the trick in the next 5 or so years is to convert big data into small decisions. So whether that's cow side decisions that, we actually use the genomic data really well to cull with or to select replacements and select export cattle, but we don't actually use it any time after that. So is there going to be opportunities to do that? We've just about finished putting John Deere links into all our tractors, so we now know which tractor does which job at which time, and so at one time it was like single data point entry, that's all we're prepared to do. We don't do anything twice. It's now like, well, actually we don't have to do anything once, like it's done automatically. How are we going to collect that? How are we going to manage that? So we've got that, you've got cow sensors, you've got sensors in the dairy, you've got your financial sensors. None of them talk to each other. I think that's going to be the real opportunity about making my life, Joe's life, staff's life easier by when they talk to each other and give you good decisions, whether it's about a cow decision, individual decision, or a paddock decision, or an overall farm decision. So that's a real continuing thing. When you think about things going forward, I reckon there's some profit in there somewhere. And then we talk about probiotics, and we're playing with probiotics in the cows and similar sort of stuff in the soil to get better soil health, to work out how we're going to keep growing more.
So there's a couple of little insights for any service providers out here in terms of, one, how to get data together and make it useful, and how to connect a lot of data. So, James, you're a relatively busy man, you know, a couple of thousand cows. I'm not sure. How many hectares under pivot?
800.
800. So there's a few things happening. How many staff do
22 or 3.
cycle through?
Yep.
Yet through 2002, which is relatively early in your time in South Australia, the 2015, you chaired Dairy South Australia. You took up the mantle in 2015 then to move and become a director of Dairy Australia, and today chair, which really appreciate your time. How do you find time and to go through, because that's someone who's contributing a lot to an industry when you've got a lot on your plate to start off with. So what's your philosophy around those sort of contributions?
I mean, dairy's been really, really good to me and Rob. So, I mean, this is an opportunity. I was an opportunity to put something back into something that we've created more wealth than we ever dreamed we would have done when we sat back and used to go to Dairy Week. But we've been really fortunate to have good people come and work for us. And they've been there a long while, and they do a really good job, so really strongly confident in the people around me. Equally, when with Dairy SA, I had really good people, so my job has never been. If you have good people around you, your job's a lot easier. And then I guess it's around things that which I enjoy doing to some extent. Like, I really enjoy farming, but I enjoy this side of the industry as well. And I think driving the innovation agenda, I mean, I'm never going to be, and I better be careful how I say this, I'm never going to be ever keen to go to an audit and risk committee meeting, to be quite frank with you. However, if it's around innovation and what's coming down the pipeline, that definitely gets me out of bed in the morning.
Great. Well, I appreciate, I think, from an industry having those thoughts of, it's pretty important for a herd improvement industry. And one of the reasons, being involved in the data gene, just the support that Dairy Australia provides data gene, and then all the knock-on impact of the genetic evaluations that everyone uses in their day-to-day life. So there is a significant contribution that's sort of one of the almost, it's like genetics itself. It's one of those silent contributors that not necessarily people see up front, like a kilogram of fertiliser or something, but it actually is one of the really key profit drivers. So thank you for that. I think, unless there's anything else, I think we've got a few minutes for if anyone would like to have any questions. Feel free to do. We've got, I've been very fortunate with running across James for many, many years and seeing the innovation, 10,000 litre jerseys at one stage, which was we helped, and so there's a fair few things there. So I'm getting a few on Slido. I can't see anybody at a microphone. So Michelle, thanks, James Graeme. James, what is the first little decision you'd like to answer to using big data?
That's a good question, Michelle. It depends what side of the business I think it'll go to, but I think the connection between feed, production, getting your feed base right every day, that's always a challenge, has always been a challenge for us. And I think the other interesting one, I think, is where do we see genomics helping that individual cow decision when it's coming along? Like, we have standard operating procedures. We like to keep things the same so there's not too big a decision tree. But having artificial intelligence or a program or whatever you want to call it behind it going, well, do you realise you're about to treat a cow that's 5 years old and probably genetically closer to the end than the beginning? Is this a good decision? That type of prompting sort of will probably help.
Take a step back just for a second. You mentioned about John Deere, and I don't think most people would relate. So you're going to work with them so you can actually measure the performance of your of your gear, your equipment?
Yeah, so it's not so much about the performance of the individual tractor, it just gives us a bucket load of information. So we know what each, for instance, we've got one in a sprayer, we know which paddock's been sprayed with which chemical at what time. We know what fertiliser's been put on what paddock at what time, we know which paddock's been mowed. My younger brother runs a John Deere chopper. He's a contractor, a forage harvester in the UK. So for a farmer cooperative, he contracts into them for methane production. He's doing 60,000 tonnes of silage a year roughly. All goes through a harvest centre. They do all their billing, dry matter, energy, protein, out of the harvest centre on the chopper spout. All their billing's done by it. Nobody, they've done weighbridge and put it through. It's within 0.5%. So when you start getting all that data coming at you, it's how do you marry that into the decisions, your management decisions with your cows as well. If you can pull all that together and make sensible decisions, I think you're really going to get somewhere.
Question then from Greg Tiller. What are the key genomic traits that you concentrate on when making those decisions to not bring that heifer into the herd?
This is when I really usually delegate to somebody who's significantly smarter than me. I'd probably, look, we go through I get either Vaughan Johnson and Paul Douglas to give us a hand to take those big numbers and give us a cull list, but basically anything that's under one standard deviation point, pretty well on most traits will be going. And we're now pretty fortunate, like with 1,000 heifers, we'll probably export 400, so there's a huge cull pressure on nowadays. And look, we're rightly or wrongly, we're pursuing A2, so if you're not A2, then you're sort of closer to the cull list than if you are A2.
Well, I think we might leave it at that. I apologise, a couple other questions that haven't been accounted for, but I'd like everyone to thank James for his time being here, and I'm sure there's chances to say hello to him over the next day. Pretty painless, fella. Good stuff.